Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regular Thursday morning live stream. I hope you're all doing well out there. I think Old Man Winter has a couple more surprises in store for us. Let's hope. I certainly have my skis still ready and willing. A couple quick updates from me of some upcoming programs. A week from today, Thursday, April 1st, April Fool's Day, we have a really special program brought to you by the World Food Program of the United Nations. We're going to be looking at Central America, hunger, and climate change. And we have a really fascinating panel of experts lined up for that particular talk. One of the conversations I enjoyed most was with Carlos Fuller, who is in Belize and the head of the, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Caribbean Climate Change organization that looks at all kinds of different climate issues across the Caribbean. So that'll be a nice tie-in with today's talk as well. That talk is free, and we are hoping to have as many folks as possible join us for that date. So please circle your calendars and join us on Thursday the 1st. The following Thursday, the 8th, we get back into our Russia disruption series with the one and only Dr. Fiona Hill, who has a lot to say about what has happened between US-Russia relations over the last little while. She is, of course, smart as they make them, and this is your opportunity to come and ask her some questions. I'm sure we all have some questions about what she went through in the first impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump. Then, and I've just confirmed this, on April 15th, that's 3 Thursdays from today, we'll feature Ambassador Derek Mitchell. He, of course, was the US ambassador to Myanmar, and he will be talking all about what is going on in Myanmar today. And we'll have a few other surprise guests during that time as well to really just bring us up to date with everything going on in Myanmar. And of course, I would be remiss were I not to mention our big event upcoming, which is our annual fundraising gala on April 21st. That's a Wednesday. We have a number of things planned for that, but most particularly we'll feature the one and only Valerie Plame interviewing former FBI Director Jim Comey. And I think he has a lot to say, and we certainly have a lot of questions for him in terms of all the major events he was involved in US politics over quite a long career of public service. Tickets you see up on our screen are $75 for individuals and $125 for households. We encourage vaccinated, viewing parties, and there's lots of different ways to ultimately support CIR in delivering our programming to high school students and college students really across the state. You know, we've grown quite a bit in terms of our digital footprint and the number of students that we're able to reach from Deming to Farmington and all places in between. So that is all I have to say. And now let me bring in today's speakers. We have two fantastic speakers for you today. First of all, we have Ambassador Luis Moreno. Welcome, Luis. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure.
So let me just go down your bio really quickly. Luis was a career member of the Foreign Service, served as ambassador to Jamaica from December 2014 to June 2017 when he retired. Prior to his stint in Jamaica, he was the Deputy Chief of Mission in Madrid, Spain, the Political Military Minister, Counselor, and Force Strategic Engagement Cell Director in Baghdad, Iraq. And he's served in Israel, Mexico, and of course in Haiti, which is a lot of what we'll discuss today. And our moderator, as always, is Ambassador Vicki Huddleston. Good morning, Vicki. How are you?
Hi, Sandy. I'm so excited about this because Luis Moreno is like my favorite person in the whole world.
Praise indeed. Well, let me turn it over to the two of you. As always, folks out there, type in your questions into the Q&A box and we'll get to them when the time comes. And looking forward to a great conversation.
Well, this should be a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You know, a few years ago, when the Clintons were in power, Bill Clinton, and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Haiti was a big deal. You know, now it's almost like Haiti, but Haiti is so amazing. You know, you say Haiti Cherie, Haiti love it or leave it. Haiti had a revolution that lasted 13 years, and finally in 1804 was the second country in the hemisphere to gain its independence, the only successful slave revolt that ended in creating a state, and then the whole world wouldn't recognize it because it would indicate that Black people shouldn't be slaves, should have their own states. So it was essentially ostracized despite helping most of Latin America gain their independence. But the sad thing is, Haiti has not, to this day, gotten its act together. And it's so sad because it's an amazing country of 11 million people, so close to the United States, and causes lots of issues that we're going to talk about today for the United States. But we're going to start with when Luis and I were in Haiti together. I was the number 2 acting ambassador and then the deputy. And Luis was in charge of political military. And you notice from his career, he's been often Iraq and then even in Israel in charge of military issues for the Foreign Service, which is really an exciting area to be in charge of. So Luis came to Haiti and became one of the first political military officers, which I'm going to ask him about that. And then I'm going to ask him about how he managed to get trapped at the harbor, at the port in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. So Luis, tell us a little bit about your amazing career, and then let's jump into Haiti.
Well, I wanted to tell the folks what an honor it is to be here with you. I just did a podcast on something called The General and the Ambassador, where I talked about Israel and the Middle East. And at the end, they did a trick quick question and said, who are your role models and biggest influences in your career? And I mentioned you. And so a little bit later, you get in touch with me. And it's really a little bit emotional for me. I got involved with, I didn't know a darn thing about Haiti. I had been as a junior officer in Colombia, first as a visa officer, and then after Pablo Escobar bombed the embassy, I became a narcotics affairs advisor. I became a staff assistant during Iran Contra, which is a whole bunch of other good stories. Worked for Elliot Abrams. And then I went for 3 years to the Upper Huallaga Valley in Peru, which was then probably the most dangerous place on earth. And I was in charge of eradicating the coca fields through manual eradication. It's a very bloody time in the Shining Path Rebellion. Became desk officer for Colombia again, and I got a call and they said they wanted somebody with operational experience and who knew how to deal with difficult situations to go to Haiti. President Clinton had just been elected. He hadn't been sworn in yet, and they expected a massive exodus of boat people to take place. And we needed programs in place to offset this and to give the administration some kind of political flexibility. So they came up with a very unique concept called in-country refugee processing. This involved a Haitian who thought that he had a political asylum claim, didn't have to go out on a boat and risk floating all the way out to Miami, that he could actually in-country, in Haiti, apply for refugee status. And we set up 3 offices in Port-au-Prince, of course, in the capital, in Lacaille, and in Cap-Haïtien. And I was the kind of overall head temporarily, and then they asked me, the predecessor asked me if I would stay on. And I did. And I transferred to Washington, to Haiti. And it was just a remarkable thing. At one point, we had to protect all the returning boat people that the Coast Guard was bringing back. Coast Guard was massively bringing people back. But then we would go on board, myself and my staff, and we try to find out if we had people fill out applications and if there were any people who we felt actually had a legitimate case for political asylum, we stayed on board. And it would take people on time for what they would process. In those days, the IRS. And then sometimes the Haitian authorities, the military authorities, who had overthrown President Aristide and running the military dictatorship, they would arrest people. And my staff would try to protect them and actually go to the jail with them, guarantee that they wouldn't be beaten. Sometimes in wars, meetings, Sometimes we had some very hostile confrontations with the Haitian authorities. Sometimes they were threatening. Sometimes it would get a little bit physical. But this went on and off for a while until the United States decided that they were going to broker some kind of agreement. If you recall, Vicki, Aristide was in Washington in exile, and they brokered this thing called the Governor's Island Accord, where the UN would bring in troops and they would supervise kind of provisional government and eventual transfer with the military would leave and President Aristide would come back. Well, on the day that this UN ship, which was a USS Harlan County, was supposed to come in the night before, you asked me to go to the port and see if there was space for the ship to actually berth and to keep going. And I went down there with my sidekick, who was the U.S. Coast Guard Ambassador, and we noticed that the Canadian Royal Canadian Mounted Police guys who were supposed to be there had fled. They fled because there were a lot of drunk guys with Ray-Ban sunglasses and Uzis who were drinking rum, who were just patrolling around the area, obviously to intimidate people. But we told them on the radio, and we said, we're sticking by here. And it was as soon as the ship began to approach, they kind of seized us. They seized Dave and I and said that they would do bad things to us if the ship proceeded to disembark with UN troops. You got into your vehicle, you rushed over to rescue us. You were held up at the port's doors, and there was a semi-riot going on. And it was just a give and take for a long time. You actually spoke to some of the people who were holding us. I passed, they let me keep my radio in. You actually had conversations with these people. At one point, I jumped out of the vehicle and ran to a nearby ship trying to hide. And it turns out it was a Cuban ship. And that probably wasn't good judgment. Ran back, got in the car, and the captain of the Harlan County had listened to this, listening through the threats, he could hear all this, and he decided to break off and headed off the horizon, at which point there was a massive celebration. All these guys were shooting weapons into the air and what have you, and they weren't paying attention to me. They had left the keys in the Jeep, put it in gear and crashed through the gate and made a run for it. Unfortunately, I said, I'm making a run for it, which kind of messed up our security guys who thought we were on foot. And, you know, the rest is history. I mean, we had to renegotiate the whole thing. And eventually, the Marines just had to come in very strong amounts and arrest all the bad guys. And eventually, we reinstated President Aristide. And I went to the airport, helped secure the airport. I was one of the first people to greet President Aristide on his arrival back in country. It's a massive humanity. It was remarkable when I introduced myself to her. So it was quite a very tense months with our relationship with these military guys, who we would always refer to, if you remember, as the de facto government. We did not recognize them as the real government.
Luis, we're having a little trouble with your audio. Do you think, try it, maybe
is there any other way to connect to your audio just to make it just a little choppy?
Yeah, is this a little better?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Okay. So the importance of this, other than the fact that Luis almost lost his life with there, he's in the port. The military doesn't want to leave. They don't want the Harlan County, which is carrying the U.S. and Canadian troops, to dock. So they point an AK-47 at his head and say, "You better not let the Harlan County dock," which it couldn't, because the military put the Cuban ship in.
The Cuban ship is right in where it was supposed to berth. Yes. Yeah, and it was wild. And that we had to have our people come in much later and by force and actually remove the Haitian military. It was relatively bloodless, even though they had said that we're going to redo Somalia, because this is during the time of the Somalia operation. And the Clinton administration was very reluctant to have another bloody type of thing occupy a country, but it went fairly smooth. But it was one of the first assignments you gave me was to actually go to every single armed forces of Haiti barracks and actually demobilize the Haitian military. And I went to every single Haitian barracks with a stack of money and usually a US Special Forces A team. And we had a list of the guys who'd be arrested for human rights violation, of guys who would go into training, vocational training, plumbing, electrician, whatever, run by our contractors. Or we would, really good guys, we'd offer them as temporary contract with the internal security forces. And that was just a wild time as well. The reason that we would ensure that these soldiers would show up was we had all their back pay. We were giving out cash. So even the bad guys who'd be arrested would show up for the cash. At one point in Croix de Bouquet, I happened to be with Jamaican military guys, not a US Special Forces 18. And they rushed the doors. We ran out of money and we had a riot. Jamaican soldier inadvertently broke my nose when he was trying to smash the hands that were coming in. I had to go to the embassy and pick up extra cash I had in my safe with blood all over the place. And some kid tried to break into my Jeep and steal everything. But we finally got there and got the situation in control. And we disarticulated the entire Haitian armed forces. And strangely enough, a few years ago, with the US State Department and US government's acquiescence, the Haitian military came back. And now there is a Haitian army again, with some of the same not so good characters involved, which I was out of US government service by then, but I was very, very struck by that.
Well, this is the whole thing about Haiti. So I thought when we were there, we probably did a good thing. You know, we tried to do the deployment, and that's when you were caught at the port in 1994 with just a small force, and that failed. So then we sent in almost 30,000 US forces to Haiti, and only one military man actually died in an incident. And it was quite successful. One of the main reasons was because you, Luis, were paying off the Haitian military with their back salaries. And I remember when we went into Iraq, we didn't pay off the Iraqi military, which would have made a huge, huge difference. But we seem not to learn these lessons.
No, it's as we were chatting before, institutional memory always seems to be a problem. And old guys like me, because I don't want to say you, but old guys like me sometimes, they're discounted. But I think really it should be kind of a repository. I mean, they're supposed to be, right? All our cables and reports are archived, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems that we do not sometimes apply them states. You know, the US military does. That's why they have hot washes and reviews and responsibility boards, et cetera, et cetera. But we seem to be a little bit behind that lessons learned thing. It's one thing I think the State Department should do better.
Well, so for a lesson learned, so you were at the airport when Aristide returned. So this was our big success. And then you returned to Haiti in 2001. I think that's correct. As the number two, like me, sometimes the chargé, sometimes the number two. And you ended up putting Aristide on a plane out of the country. So talk about a lesson learned. You're there greeting the plane for Aristide to come back. And then less than 10 years later, you're there putting him on a plane.
Yeah, again, I was saying my career, my life has been somewhat circular and cyclical. When I came back 10 years later as the number two, I'd just like to say that Haiti is a place that really gets into your blood. At any given moment, over the years, you go to the U.S. Embassy and you take a census, a lot of people have been there more than once because it gets into your blood. There's something about Haitian people, the culture, the way things are, the nobility of the Haitian people. Despite all these hardships, always seem to have a smile on their face and try to look on the best side of life. So I came back, and again, well, before I left, 10 years before, I told my buddy, I said, hey, you know, the people that we're defending and protecting from the military and hiding them, those guys are prosecuting the other side in a matter of years. You know that. And we're probably going to have the US military come in again. And I really regretted being completely correct on that. By the time I came back, Aristide was in power, and he was the one suppressing human rights. He was the one helping drug traffickers and enriching, I think, his organization more than himself, more than a lot of people do. One thing in Haiti, going back to the Duvalier years, and maybe even before, Haitian leaders have always created a shadow parallel security force to intimidate the opposition. During the Duvalier era, these thugs were called Tonton Maputs. During the time of the military government, they were called attachés. There's another group called FRAP, which, you know, out and out thugs. And Aristide ended up doing the same thing with his Lavalas extremists. He called them chimères, kind of like ghosts. And these guys, there's even something called a cannibal army. And he was employing this parallel security force to do absolutely what his predecessors had done. So he came in on a wave of optimism as a change, as a democratic, holding up for the poor and the oppressed. And then he turned, unfortunately, into an oppressor and a corrupt individual himself, in our opinion. And we had quite a battle convincing people. You know, we had congressional delegations come down, we had all sorts of people come down. We'd show them the evidence of corruption, and a lot of people found it hard to accept that, in fact, Aristide had turned into something like that. But it was really massive. And at one point, a group of disaffected individuals, former military guys connected with human rights violations, drug traffickers, gathered on the other side of the Dominican border and literally launched a kind of Keystone Cops, but yet, strangely enough, effective invasion of the Haiti side. And Aristide's security forces fell like dominoes. And it was painful because I had been under your watch, one of the guys who helped found the Haitian National Police as an alternative to the army. We built that Haitian Police Academy. We had training. We had OPDAT, all sorts of people working there. And these guys, SWAT teams, they fell like dominoes. And they began approaching Port-au-Prince closer and closer and closer. Meanwhile, the so-called civil society, the rich guys in Port-au-Prince who lived up in the hills, they were supporting the political arm of this rebellion. Things were very tense. I told you that I got into a melee in a restaurant with these guys, and a guy ended up hitting me in the head with my radio. I never told him that, so I apologize. But the tension was remarkable. And at one point, as they closed into Port-au-Prince, it looked like there was going to be a bloodbath, quite frankly. And we had evacuated the embassy, and the ambassador James Foley, a great guy, my A100 classmate, and still to this day, one of my best friends in the world. He was living up on the hill, you know, the house up on the hill. And I stayed downtown. We split the Marines from fast to fleet terrorist. Halfway with the ambassador, halfway with me. And it was just chaos down there, absolute chaos. People trying to sneak in the embassy and shoot us, you know, for whatever reason, all sorts of just complete chaos. Aristide was leveraging boat people against us, threatening an exodus of boat people if we didn't support him, let him get more arms and ammunition. bringing more of these professional mercenaries from the Steel Foundation out of San Francisco. The administration kind of called us off. Colin Powell called us off, and we did not let him bring in massive amounts of arms, ammunition, and security guys. And at one point, things got so bad, he actually called up Ambassador Luis and he said, okay, I want your help in leaving. I want to leave. And we called Secretary Powell. Secretary Powell said, okay, we'll help, but you know what? He's got to resign. So we passed on this message. Didn't have a lot of detail for it now, but it was up to me to pick him up at his house and take him to the airport and get his resignation.
I understand that because you were told, Aristide has to go to stop this violence, and you went to his house and you got him to come with you to the airport. In fact, presumably he was willing to do so. This had a major impact on your career.
Yes, I'll get to that in a second. Very much so. Anyway, we had to call the rebels and tell them to stop attacking Port-au-Prince that night. And I said to myself, well, how do I find them? Well, I called some of the right-wing nutcases that were supposed political operatives in the city. And of course, they immediately gave me a cell phone number. And I called the head of the rebels, who invited me to a party. And I explained to him that he had to hold off on attacking, that the US government wanted to avoid a bloodbath. Aristide was ready and waiting. Aristide was dressed up. He had a beautiful suit on. His wife was beautifully dressed. They had their overnight bags packed. They had their papers, and they were surrounded by two groups. Those American mercenaries I told you about from Steel Foundation, and the heavy weapons platoon from the Haitian National Police, machine guns, the whole 9 yards. So I went up there. We only had a couple of cars, 4 guys, I think it was in total. And I said, hey, I always spoke to him in Spanish because, President Aristide spoke Spanish, Hebrew, just a whole bunch of languages. But over the years, I'd spoken to him in Spanish. I said, Mr. President, you know why I'm here. I said, can I please have the letter before we go? And he said, no, I'll give it to you before I get on the plane. And I kind of hesitated. He goes, look, my word is my bond. Of course, his word had been absolutely not worth very much in the past few months, but I said, okay. We went, and all the heavily armed Haitian security guys went to the right, and us and Aristide and the security contractors went left. I couldn't explain that. And later it turned out he had told his own Haitian guys that he was going to give a press conference in the palace, and they needed to secure the palace. He didn't want them to see him fleeing the country. He was afraid of how they would react. Kind of understand that now, but no idea what was going on. As they told us the plane was approaching, I said, Mr. President, can you give me the letter? And his wife had it in her purse, and she gave it to him, who gave it to me. She was shooting me daggers. I mean, absolute daggers. And I was kind of nervous and a little bit discombobulated. And I told him the story. I said, I don't know, Mr. President, if you remember that I was the guy who met you when you came off the plane 10 years ago. And now how ironic it is that I'm the one who's going to put you on the plane, you leaving Haiti. And he kind of patted me on the arm, said, well, he said in English, well, Moreno, sometimes life is like that. It's the only thing he'd ever said to me in English in years. The plane came, we put him on the plane. We didn't allow the mercenary guys to go on with their machine guns, and so there's weapons just littering the tarmac outside the landing zone. And I said, this is great, we did our job. No one moved, the plane just stood there on the tarmac for ages. And I called and said, look, the sun is coming up. I said, we can't be seen here. Either side is gonna put our lives in big danger. Well, finally the plane took off. What happened was that there had been a deal with the president of South Africa to take him, but he reneged at the last minute. And DOD did not want that plane to take off without a destination. It's somewhat understandable. So he ended up in the Central African Republic, and he was very upset. I mean, I'd be upset too if I thought I was going to Johannesburg and ended up in Baku. But at that same time, after the plane took off, Maxine Waters and some other people on CNN saying that Luis Moreno had kidnapped the democratically elected president of Haiti, which of course I kind of viewed it as saving his life. But that affected my career in the future as my name came up for senior positions, and certain people in Congress blocked me twice at least that I remember. And finally, I was very surprised I got to be ambassador to Jamaica. I think Hillary Clinton kind of insisted there towards the end. But that's only half the story. The other half of the story is we went to the presidential palace to secure some papers that he made me promise that I would secure for him. And there was no one in the palace. The soldiers had gone, the policemen had gone. And I walked into his office. I'm sitting at his desk, collecting the things. I have like 4 middle-aged American guys with me. And I get a phone call from our doctor, Dr. Perk. He was the doctor who knew that. And he said, hey, you better get out of there. The rebels are on the way to the palace. I said, I don't see anyone. I looked at them and sure enough, went to the gate. Guy Philippe, who's a notorious drug trafficker, who's in jail in Florida now, said, open up the gate. And I said, no, I'm not opening the gate. He said, well, then we'll have to take it by force. I said, if you want to kill 4 old guys, I mean, go ahead, but the Marines who ride offshore, who'll be here shortly, aren't going to look very kindly at that. And we kind of looked at each other and kind of backed off, made circles around the palace with his technical, the jeeps with machine guns on. And then he backed off. And we waited. And I said, hurry up, get those Marines here right away. And that game went on. We tried to kill a prime minister. Unfortunately for them, I was at the prime minister's residence when they came to do that. We had a repeat of this. And we went back and forth. I ended up having a bunch of Marines. Finally, I could move out of the embassy floor and move to my house. But we had hidden some guys, by the way. And I lived with Marines until it was time for me to leave.
I think, people don't realize how really closely involved the United States was. And of course, there you are, you're the one, greeting Aristide, then putting him on the plane, then going to the palace to pick up his documents, preventing the palace from being overrun. So this, this close involvement of the United States, which, put you at risk often. Is there some way out of that? Should we be that closely involved in trying to save Haiti?
I
Saving it?
I seriously recommend anyone who's interested in this, go to the Wikipedia page. I put in a list of Haitian presidents from, Louverture, Toussaint to, the pleasant gentleman we have now, Jovenel Moïse. And there's a whole section of US military commanders or military governors. There's more of those than there are presidents of Haiti. I mean, the list is just incredible. Since before the World War I, all the way to, recently, all the military commanders and all the UN, it's remarkable. Until you physically see it like that, you don't understand. Haiti has had, also one of the big problems it has is environmental. Haiti it's stymied any type of economic development. The Haitian agriculture, which should be what sustains Haiti, is collapsing. The deforestation, because people were short-sighted and want to cut down all the trees to make charbon, the little charcoal wood thing. So the entire countryside is just completely deforested and crumbling. Haiti will run out of potable water within the next decade. I mean, if there's going to be a war in Hispaniola, it's going to be over water more than anything else. One of the most impressive things that you could ever possibly do is fly over the Haitian Dominican Republic border in a helicopter or a small plane. It looks like a giant had just taken a magic marker and went through the middle of it. On the left side, the Haitian side, deforestation, no paved roads. You don't see electrical walking stuff. And you go to Dominican, it's plush, green, paved roads. I mean, it just is the stark contrast between Haiti and the Dominican Republic is remarkable. Haiti sits on a major fault line. And as you can see, the earthquake that took place where millions of people literally died it's in a hurricane belt. So they suffer massive hurricanes. Infrastructure, you can't say it's crumbling because it's really non-existent. Educational opportunities are zero. So a lot of people live in really kind of this, they don't understand, no kind of complex understanding of what they need to do to get out of this incredible cycle of no education, of no infrastructure, of a crumbling infrastructure. It just keeps going on, and they've been betrayed by their leadership so often. The leaders, even the ones that come in with good intentions, as I think Aristide did the first time, they find that to survive, they're going to have to create an alternative security force. They're going to have to rely on corruption. I mean, I remember one of the transcripts I saw of kind of that we had on some Colombian traffickers. Some organization shared it with me to get a kick out of it. The Colombians were saying to each other, "We can't operate in here. This place is so chaotic. It's not even good for us." You would think that it would be because it's so chaotic, but they couldn't even find the right people to bribe, and there was not any type of organization. So Haiti has really been a land at people who have suffered immensely, and yet you see a slum like Cité Soleil, where it built on top of a garbage dump, literally a reclaimed garbage dump, where people live in the most extreme poverty I've ever seen in my life. They say, okay, Haiti's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, the fourth poorest country in the world. But until you see that, when I had your job, when I was DCM, and the Marines controlled Cité Soleil, I made it a requirement that each junior officer, when they arrived, had to take a tour of Cité Soleil to realize what the hardships that so many Haitians had to live through. Cité Soleil, I had to stop that because people would get sick. Cité Soleil now is controlled by gangs. Gangs have unified, and so many people that we have deported on these mass deportations we've done in Haiti. These people have organized crime experience from New York, Chicago, Miami, and they go to Haiti and they become kind of mentors in a negative way. Kidnapping is one of the prime industries right now. And the political unrest, it's back, Vicki, to an environment that you and I would be very comfortable with because it's complete chaos now with President Moïse and his refusing to step down. Now they're saying maybe they're not going to have elections. You had a guy who's a kind of a mediocre singer who was elected president, who now it seems he's in cahoots with the president. Looks like they're going to just flip-flop back and course and control everything. So it's it's dire.
Yeah, it's so tragic because 11 million people on this tiny 1/3 of an island. So first of all, there's just way too many people, an island with very few resources. And then, as you've said, you've gone through all the problems, the education, the healthcare, all of this inadequate, despite enormous amounts of aid that have been put in. And then we come to today, and Jovenel Moïse, the president, seems to be in league with the guy we call Sweet Mickey, who was the singer who was elected president that you're speaking of. And Hillary Clinton actually chose him. That brings us back again to the United States becoming overly involved in Haiti and perhaps in the wrong way. So what should the United States be doing now with a president who looks like he's clinging to power, is going to stay in a year more than he's entitled to, that seems to be maybe setting things up so the next president will be the one selected by Hillary Clinton, sweet Mickey, who's just as corrupt as the present one.
Right.
What-
I always say Hillary Clinton obviously never heard the guy sing. The thing is, we just keep putting Band-Aids on things. And when things get to be out of control and in the headlines, and either there's a mass exodus of boat people or the violence goes off the scale so that Haiti's kind of isolated. You know, these things go kind of, these peaks and valleys by how many international travel to Port-au-Prince. Because when the International Press Corps goes to Port-au-Prince, the coverage goes way up and then people think that it's an issue. But it's in that slow simmer all along. And we just don't do long-term economic development, job creation programs, education programs. It's going to take massive investment, massive US investment. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Haitians in the street say, we need to be the 51st state. Please, you know, make the invasion permanent, you know, all these type of things. But we just take this Band-Aid approach instead of, but these long-term initiatives of economic development, infrastructure development, job creating programs, education, water purification, forestation, environmental awareness, all that stuff takes an immense amount of investment, immense amount of time. And in the political climate in the US, I don't know, is there a stomach for that, for US Congress to approve the type of billions of dollars, you know, that we did in Colombia or that we do in the Middle East every year? I mean, that's what it's going to take to break this cycle, because otherwise it's just going to go. And I can tell you, in a couple of years, we're going to have to invade again, either under the auspices of the UN, the OAS, or whomever, because the situation will be out of control. So we just keep repeating. History keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, and we don't seem to learn from history, but in my opinion, the Biden administration has a great opportunity. We know that the major migration problems are coming from Central America, and it's because of gang violence, of poverty, of lack of opportunity. The other place the migration's coming from is Haiti for the same reasons, also from Cuba, because of desperation in Cuba, if nothing else, no opportunity. So what about a Caribbean Central American initiative that actually includes Cuba, which has the best educational system of most of these areas, that somehow is a huge Marshall Plan that begins to raise these countries up?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when Colombia looked like it was going under, when you couldn't leave Bogota, other by plane or helicopter because the FARC were controlling the countryside and had a stranglehold, when wholesale cocaine in the United States was dirt cheap, when just on the precipice on the edge, we came up with Plan Colombia. We developed a program. We got Undersecretary Pickering to sponsor it. We got the entire US Congress behind it. I was the guy on the ground for that, for Plan Colombia. And we started giving Colombia $1.4 billion a year. And it worked. I mean, it didn't work so much about the flow of cocaine to the United States, but it certainly rescued Colombia, certainly wrested the control of the country away from the guerrillas. It kind of broke this cycle, and Colombia is relatively considered a success story in many parts. But because we put in the time and the effort to do so, like we have, for instance, in creating the qualitative military edge that we've done to our allies in the Middle East. That's all this stuff has cost billions and billions of dollars. And unless we have the political will in the United States to use billions and billions of dollars, then it's a shame, because the Haitian people really do deserve better. I know that we would see on our way to work all the Haitian young girls in their little braids and their uniform, the school uniforms, completely clean and ironed. It would take that mother an hour and a half walking to get, a bucket of water to be able to clean that uniform and get those girls ready for school. And unfortunately, after fifth or sixth grade, no one goes to school because they can't afford it or it's not available. But the nobility of the Haitian people is really amazing. And they really do deserve better from their leadership and certainly from us.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that. I mean, the Haitian people are so resilient. They're so kind. Their art is just amazing. And of course, they don't deserve this, as you say. And I would say the Cuban people don't deserve their situation, or the Central American people. Yet, if we continue just to put band-aids on this, as you said, for Haiti, uh, the migration immigration crisis is going to grow and grow, and yet I don't see a response yet. And of course, the Biden administration hasn't even been in for 100 days, and I'm glad that.
No, it's early. There's going to have to be adjustment. But I saw something that kind of disappointed me today. It was on the U.S. Embassy Twitter feed from this morning in Port-au-Prince. It's a picture of Joe Biden trying to look stern, and there's a Haitian says, "Moi quand dit ça bien clair, pas venir." Let me be very clear, don't come. I mean, okay, I understand why the embassy put that up, but I mean, back in our day, we have airtime on the radio and we try to discourage from people for coming, but because of safety issues and because of life, how dangerous that voyage could be, and that's why you encourage, not just like pointing a finger and saying, don't you dare come. I think it kind of sends a kind of difficult message. One good thing, Vicki, is that Roberta Jacobson, our really great Foreign Service officer now at the NSC and in charge of the Central American Initiative, they're going to ask Congress for $4 billion to create exactly these type of programs that we're speaking about in Central America.
I mean, it's great that there's so many career people, and Roberta, as you mentioned, who was our ambassador to Mexico, is now in charge of the border, so we can be hopeful. But that also raises an issue. Before I turn, we only have one big question, so before I get to Sandy, maybe Luis, you can talk a little bit about how Mexico is playing into this, because it seems like Mexico is not playing a very good role in the current crisis on the border.
Right. Well, Mexico, of course, with Donald Trump's administration, had a very unique kind of arrangement. You would have thought that the left-wing populist Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador would not get along with the right-wing populist Donald Trump, but actually they did. They kind of bonded in a strange way. They both did like process, like to govern kind of off the hook, off the cuff. Donald Trump by Twitter and Lopez Obrador with what they call his mañaneras, or morning. So basically, the arrangement we had with Mexico was put 17,000 National Guard troops. The National Guard guys were supposed to replace the federal police and cut out corrupt, but instead, Lopez Obrador took those 17,000 guys and put them on the southern border. Then he took 27,000 regular army troops and put them in the northern border regions. So as long as Lopez Obrador was doing that, Trump kind of gave him a pass on drug trafficking, intelligence sharing. Even the guy that was the Minister of Defense that we extradited to California on drug trafficking charges, Lopez Obrador calls up Trump and says, "Hey, send that guy back. My military guys are all pissed off." And indeed, Trump just sent him back, no questions asked. Lopez Obrador has now was one of the last people to congratulate Joe Biden on his election. It was Lopez Obrador, Vladimir Putin, and like Kim Il-jung, who were the guys who were the last people to recognize Joe Biden's election. So there's going to be kind of a rough ride with the Mexicans, I think, the next 4 years.
And how do we deal with that? I mean, Mexico is essential. It's it's the Canada, Mexico, the United States on
Right.
NAFTA for trade. It's essential on controlling the border, but yet dare I say that Mexico's turning into a narco state?
Well, I certainly think that Lopez Obrador's policy, which he named hugs, not bullets, certainly has not been very effective. But here's the bottom line. We do almost $700 billion in trade with Mexico. They are the main, one of the main places where our exports go, and we are the main place that all of their exports go. No one wants to upset the apple cart on that. So they're going to have to, like it or not, we're in the same bed with the Mexicans, and we're going to have to make that work. I don't think Biden will go for the same type of arrangement that Lopez Obrador has with. By the way, Lopez Obrador, despite a complete fiasco in handling the COVID-19 stuff, like Trump, he kind of dismissed it early on, refused to be seen wearing a mask in public, and ironically also came down with COVID-19. His popularity numbers, he's still above water. And with the upcoming midterm elections in Mexico, he looks to be in a good position. And if his Morena party wins the midterm elections that are coming up, boy, he's going to be intractable and even more difficult to deal with.
Why is he still so popular? I know he's a populist, but he hasn't done well on COVID. The Mexican economy isn't doing all that well. Why is he so popular?
Well, he's got that folksy approach. He just appeals to people in a very populist kind of a demagogue. He keeps saying all the right things. He keeps this nationalistic image. He keeps threatening all the people doing foreign investment, all the international firms doing, and then his poor people in Hacienda and in commerce have to like make up and do the opposite of what he's saying. So he's just been a very fairly folksy, skillful politician to keep his head above water.
Yeah, and do you think maybe if Roberta, Ambassador Jacobson, decided that we really did need to put a Marshall Plan into Central America, the Caribbean, would it make sense to have Mexico be an important player in this?
Absolutely, it would be useless without them. And there is a draft plan. I heard $4 billion for economic development and job creation in Central America. And that would include, the problem with Central America you have is, quite frankly, look at Honduras. The president's brother is an indicted drug trafficker. He's suspected of drug trafficking. Guatemala, corruption is off the books. And in Costa Rica, the president has made a business out of these quarantines of keeping his political opposition bottled up. So you have these, and of course, Trump cut off all the USAID programs to punish these countries, which is counterintuitive. You're cutting the very programs that are meant to reduce migration north. So it's a very, very difficult situation. Now the unaccompanied minors program is extremely overstressed. So there are a lot of issues to be dealt with, and heaven help and protect the new U.S. ambassador to Mexico. Trump actually had a very good ambassador, Ambassador Landau, who was very popular with the Mexican people and related very well, spoke perfect Spanish, etc. So whoever Biden puts in, it's going to be tested.
Oh, yeah, and it's such a critical relationship. I want to go back to Haiti for a minute because we have a comment from David and Katie about a clinic, Friends of Children of Haiti, which provide. It says American trained Haitian staff. There are so many American private efforts. I'm thinking of the two major hospitals, the Schweitzer Hospital, then another major hospital up in Mirabel, and then the missionaries, the evangelical church in the South has put in millions of dollars and then sponsors people coming down to Haiti. Does this do any good in the long run?
Yeah, I think it does a lot of good, but they're all Band-Aids. But yes, I mean, immense amount of good. And I tell you, there's so many hands together that practically have saved so many people in Cité Soleil. by the American father who does work there. Senator DeWine, when he was senator, was a constant visitor. They're just all over the country, and heaven, bless them, because they do make a difference. They do. Unfortunately, some bad people have tried to take advantage of it and done kind of funny business with adoptions and other stuff. So there's been a little bit of bad, but mostly overall a lot of good.
I think it sort of shows that Americans really, really do care. They put a lot of their own time and effort into Haiti. So, what for your sort of last observation? We've talked about Mexico, we've talked about Central America and Haiti. Where do you think we're headed with these countries? These are our neighbors. This should be our security zone, and yet it's a huge mess.
It should be, and it's a real liability and vulnerability on our part. Just the whole migration thing could potentially overwhelm us. Drug trafficking, the whole arms for drugs business. Just take a look, for instance, I was ambassador in Jamaica. There's just an unbridled, constant flow of guns coming into Jamaica, transferred because of trades for marijuana, for ganja. So there's a ganja for guns thing. The Jamaican coastline is unprotected. The Haitian coastline is unprotected. I don't want to sound like, an alarmist, but it's a real vulnerability that you could use people who want to do us harm to take it these holes that we have. And of course, for drug trafficking, cocaine has been replaced by methamphetamine. Methamphetamines were made primarily by motorcycle gangs and guys in their tubs, out there in the woods. Now that's completely been taken over by the Mexican cartels, who can just are super producers, super effective, and the distribution routes are all controlled by the Mexican cartels. The Mexican cartels are extraordinarily violent. Now, our success in Colombia, one of the unintended consequences of that was Mexico, because when the cartels fell and then the FARC fell, who did the drug distribution routes fall to? Mexican cartels. And the Mexican cartels have a tradition of incredible intergang violence and political corruption. And that's what you're seeing in Mexico right now. Incredible amounts of political corruption, violence. And part of it is because of success we had in Colombia, ironically.
So this, in the end, it seems like this has been, such a wide-ranging and interesting conversation. But in the end, it seems like what you're saying, with a little help from me, is that, we're facing, if not an existential crisis, I think these countries are facing existential crisis: overpopulation, poverty, drugs, violence, water, and this is all on our border. Is anybody well, the Biden administration must be watching, because they appointed Ambassador Jacobson as the border person.
The problem is that we've ignored everything the past 4 years. This whole so-called America First business really isn't America First at all. It's only America, and ignores the rest of the world, and especially our allies. These people can also be our allies. We need them politically in the UN, in the OAS. Our struggle against Venezuela, for instance, to bring democracy to Venezuela, we need votes in the OAS and in the UN. And we also need their manpower should something happen in Venezuela, some kind of humanitarian efforts, which are greatly needed. But if we don't handle the stuff and get a handle on it, if we are preemptive, this is just going to get worse and worse, and then we won't pay attention to it until it explodes, and we have massive humanitarian crises throughout Central America, throughout the Caribbean, and it's going to just kind of overwhelm us. And I think that's very hard. I think we have to do a much better public relations job within the United States. United States politically is so divided, so inward looking, and we don't look out towards the rest of the world, and that's really a big mistake.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Luis. Sandy?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. There's a question in the Q&A. I, of course, have one question for you, which is picking up on that comment you made about potable water in Haiti and it disappearing in 10 years' time. What's the thinking on this? What's the plan? Is there a plan? What in the world would happen in the event that drinking water is inaccessible?
Well, that's part of what I'm saying. There is no long-range plan. I'm sure there are guys in USAID mission in Port-au-Prince in the embassy who are working on some stuff, but there's no massive, really, program, no international UN addressing all these things. And the deforestation keeps going on. The agricultural sector in Haiti, which is once a strong point, has completely collapsed. Ironically, the President Moïse, he made his money being a successful farmer, but farming now is it's a non-starter. Haiti cannot really support itself. That is going to be a major issue unless there's a massive international infrastructure effort to address this.
So question in the Q&A from Judith Alger. She asks, have the Clinton Foundation and Paul Farmer and all the investments he was able to bring and their involvement in Haiti, has that generated good results, or what's kind of the net gain of some philanthropic and or health investments in Haiti?
Paul Farmer's terrific AIDS program really were kind of a real breakthroughs and a real pioneer in AIDS research and possible vaccinations. And Paul Farmer himself has been just instrumental in leading the fights against AIDS. Just remarkable. As we were speaking with Vicki, yes, some of the private sector and church type initiatives have been very helpful, but like Vicki said, a country of 10, 11 million people, and each one of these places are not coordinating necessarily with the other ones, and they're addressing hundreds of people. So I mean, there's a big gap, and you really need governments to step in and produce. Maybe the UN Development Foundations can look into this, but something really needs to be done.
Undoubtedly. Well, Ambassador Luis Moreno, thank you so much for taking the time. There's so much to talk about, and we're really grateful for everything that you brought for us here today. And thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Luis. This has been great.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
do something.
Thank you, boss.
Thanks as always to Vicki. Thank you, Luis. And folks, I really hope to see you a week from today when we will keep exploring Central America, hunger issues, climate change, and how that has really upset so many of the ways in which we or human societies have prospered there for millennia. So there's a lot to talk about. Look forward to seeing you next week. We, of course, have our last great decisions this coming Tuesday, where Todd Greentree will be talking about the two Koreas. And of course, Kim Jong-un had a small present for the new Biden administration yesterday by launching two ballistic missiles. Sort of standard fare for the Korean government or North Korean government to welcome a new US administration with a show of force. So lots to talk about this crazy world as always. And we're looking forward to seeing you at our next live stream. Until then, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.